people think that when you go to a training, it's a one and done. Oh yeah, I've done that training before. And I'm like, I don't care whether it's my training or anyone's training. You actually have to be immersed in it, and you have to keep doing it. Trainings that I find that are very valuable, I'll do them multiple times. Books that I read that are very valuable, I will read them multiple times. The first time that you go through it, you're only going to absorb 10, 20, 30% of that at a retention level. You might be processing it as it's happening, even like this interview right now that we're discussing things. If you're just listening to this while you're commuting into the office, then you're probably going to retain 10% if you're average, 20% if you're really astute. There's still 80% of things that were said or covered that you're not going to retain after a 24-hour period.
Hey everyone, this is Devin Miller here with another episode of The Inventive Expert. I'm your host, Devin Miller, the serial entrepreneur that's grown several startups into 7- and 8-figure businesses, as well as a founder and CEO of Miller IP Law, where he helps startups and small businesses with their patents and trademarks. If you ever need help with yours, just go to strategymeeting.com, grab some time with us to chat. We're always here to help. Now, today we've got another great guest on the podcast, Ryan Murray, and we're going to be talking about a few different things, but a little bit on how entrepreneurs can be creative with customer service offerings to address customers' needs. I think that's always a hard balance as a startup, to give good customer service, be excited about it, and also do it in a good way. And then keeping the customers' attentions and making it exciting, changing up the offerings as needs be to meet customers' needs. Maybe talk a little bit about when and when not to make those changes, and how to listen to customer feedback, and where to spend your time and money, kind of those regards. And then maybe a little bit, we'll talk about cleaning up some of the time-consuming tasks, and we'll see how far we get within all that list. But I'm sure it's going to be a great conversation either way. And with that much as introduction, welcome on the podcast, Ryan.
Hey, great to be here. I appreciate it.
So I gave kind of a bit of a run through of some of the things we'll probably talk about as far as with the areas of expertise. But before we dive into that, as a reminder for the audience, we have the sister podcast, The Inventive Journey. Ryan was a guest on that, so definitely make sure to go check out that podcast and that episode to hear a little bit more about Ryan's journey and hear the background there. But for those people that are either saying, I don't have time, or I don't want to go listen to a full episode, just give me the 1 or 2 minute version as to why Ryan is an expert and why I should listen to him on these topics. Give us a bit of an introduction as to why you know what you're talking about on these topics.
Sure, absolutely. So I own the company Marketing Management Money. You can find it at marketingmanagementmoney.com. We do small business trainings. We work with businesses anywhere from startup to about 10 million in revenue. That's my sweet spot of where I spend most of my time. And through this process, so I spent the last decade plus working with hundreds of entrepreneurs and seeing the good, the bad, and the ugly. And I decided to start, sharing some of those experiences and really looking at it from the entrepreneur's angle. One of the things that I've shared before is I had this opportunity where I was working with the CEO of it was basically a Kickstarter fund. And we had brought them out to be a keynote for a business conference that we were putting on. And, so this guy, he flies back from New York, and I, had the chance to go pick him up at the airport, talk with him a little bit. And he makes this comment. And he says that he's like, yeah, when we started our company, we were kind of small. We only got about $400,000 in, investor startup money. And I just told him, I said, you got to realize the audience that you're talking to, where you're coming right now. I don't have any businesses that, have gotten anywhere close to that. And so it's a very different audience. And it really got me thinking about the fact that there's so many different levels of entrepreneurship. You see Shark Tank, you see these big things that are very flashy, and that exists. It's real. But I believe that there's a lot more grease monkeys out there. There's a lot more people that are just trying to get their real estate brokerage up and running. There's a lot more CPAs that are just running their firm, and these are successful businesses, but they're not out there being on Shark Tank or pitching to angel investors or different things like that. And so we really focus our company and our training on saying, okay, what is it that that most entrepreneurs are dealing with? What are their struggles? What are their successes? And we've just developed a lot of trainings, a lot of content around that. And so you talked about the customer service piece.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. That's I think that there's always struggles. First of all, I had to smile because there's a lot of businesses out there that would be dying for a $400,000 investment. Right. There are other businesses that would be a drop in the bucket, and they can't even get the business launched because it's a much more labor cash intensive. So I like that there is that dichotomy, but I'm like, I know a lot of businesses that would say, hey, if I can get 100,000, I can get my business. I get 50,000, I can get my business up and running. And I would kill for that. So don't complain about anybody that's coming into the business. But with that, I think that one of the things you hit on that I definitely agree with is there's a lot of struggles with businesses, and not even just struggles, things you have to figure out, things that you aren't an expert on, things that you're not familiar with, and the list goes on. And with that, you're always having to learn new things, figure out new things, and there isn't a lot of times a right or wrong answer, and there's no playbook. And one of those things I think that is hard, difficult, and what we're going to talk a bit about today is on the customer service end, right? So first of all, there are people, I just don't want to talk with those customer service that are always complaining, because you always, the problem with customer service is 95 or 99% of the time, or whatever that is, and I'm making up the number, it's the complaints, right? Very seldom do people call up customer service and say, you guys did an amazing job, and I'm just calling to say thank you. Now, I have had a few of those on our business say, hey, you guys are different than most attorneys, appreciate the responsiveness and all the work you guys do in making it a clear and simple process. But I'd say that's the exception. And even within the law firm, when we do a ton and we stand out, we still don't hear a lot about that. So one is people don't like to or work with customer service because you're always having to deal with complaints. And then two, it's always a big, kind of time suck, right? So you have to put in, how do you man it? Who's going to man it? How are you going to train them? How are you going to make it a good experience? How are you going to deal with customers that typically aren't happy, and kind of making that whole thing? So walk us through on that customer service front. How do you even go about, first of all, getting excited about getting or dealing with people that are unhappy with you, but also making it a good experience to where it's a plus to your business, as opposed to something that you're just kind of throwing in there because it's expected.
Right. And I'm going to take a little bit of a different angle. The common saying is the squeaky wheel gets the grease. And when it comes to customer service, I actually say the squeaky wheel gets replaced. Instead of trying to fix a broken wheel, why don't you just go get a wheel that works well? And what I mean by that is, don't get sucked into this idea that every customer is a good customer for you. And I see this with customer service, the customer's always right. I'm like, no, the customer's not always right. And there is a skill in business in being able to say no to the right people and saying yes to the right people. Like
no to the wrong people, yes to the right people, right?
I screwed that up, and I'm like,
I don't think I'm going to tell the right people no.
Well, absolutely. In my mind, I was going with you got to identify the right people to say no to. So let's get this right. But there are certain people you don't want to be customers for your business. And I'll give an example. I was actually just this week working with a business, and they had an opportunity, or have an opportunity, to work with a very large multinational. And they're pretty excited because they're doing some design work for this multinational. This multinational has contracted with them to design one of their products. And, this is a big deal for kind of a smaller business to have this opportunity. And so, they've been putting a ton of time and effort and resources into this. But the problem is the project's starting to just get drawn out. And they're coming to me and they're saying, okay, what do I do? Because we're way over budget. The multinational is refusing to increase, so they put an initial amount down. It was to the tune of about $20,000. And they're refusing to put additional money into the project because they're saying, no, we paid for this up front. The $20,000 was supposed to get the design. We're only paying for design here, like all of the manufacturing and everything, that's a separate cost. And so, this small business is now in this conundrum where they are feeling like the amount of time and resources is gone beyond the $20,000. This process is drawn out for well over a year, and they're not convinced that they want to actually do the follow-up project with this multinational because they don't know if it's a good deal. And so as we were talking through this, and I just asked the question, I said, why are you saying yes to everything that the multinational is doing? And I'm like, well, because they're the customer. They reach out to us and we're trying to make it right. And I'm like, well, the customer is kind of abusing you here. You can say no just because you got into an initial agreement. And sometimes no means walking away, which hurts, because like the whole idea was that the initial design was just kind of, getting the ball rolling. And then they were going to have ongoing license agreements with the development that was really going to make them the money. This was supposed to be, a $250,000 plus annual project for them. And it just keeps getting drawn out and drawn out. And so, using this experience, I'm looking at it, I'm saying, just because they're big, just because it looks like an opportunity doesn't mean that the customer is always right. And I don't agree with you saying yes to everything, and when I was talking to him, I kind of used the analogy of an abusive relationship. I'm like, you know what? You might have thought on the onset that this girl was right for you and she was everything that you wanted in a relationship, but now you're seeing that maybe this isn't the relationship that you thought it was going to be. And, maybe you just need to break up, and yeah, breakups hurt, but at some point you got to look at it that way. And so, when I look at customer service, I look at the long, the long game. I say, what are you going to get out of this? For the long haul. And is it, if it's a short engagement, let's say that, maybe you're online and you're just looking for that 5-star rating from them and you're never really going to interact with them again. But the long haul is that 5-star rating is going to be seen by future customers for years to come. And so, you're looking at it that way. But if in the short run, you're never going to see them again, they're really not interested in your products or services, be polite to them. I don't think that you need to be rude to people, but there's nothing wrong with saying, hey, you know what? You're not a good fit for me. We should probably just part ways. It'll save you some money and save me some grief. And I'll give you a referral to someone who can take care of your needs. That's a lot of time my approach.
If you're hiring the client, sometimes you don't want to refer them over to anybody because you say, nah, they're not going to want it any more than I am. But no, I agree with you.
I keep in my back pocket different referrals that I like and referrals that I don't like. And I mean, this is kind of bad to say, but there are people that I'm like, oh yeah, I'm giving you this client because they're a time waster. And I'm like, hey, I've got a great person for you to go see. And so I do that strategy. Does that make me a bad person? I don't know.
No, well, maybe it makes you a bad person. Who knows? But I definitely get it, and I think it's a good idea. And I'm agreeing on. I agree with you on a lot of that. There are clients. I haven't fired a ton of clients over the years. Most of them are honestly pretty good. There are some that I don't love working with, or I kind of dread their call, but they're still good clients, and I just know that they take a little bit more handholding, which isn't a bad thing. I specifically set up the law firm to focus on startups and small businesses, going into it knowing that I'm going to have to do more handholding than big institutional clients that are already pretty experienced. But there are those that just, that it is forever. Every time that they do something, they're wanting to, get $5,000 worth of services for $2,000, or they're always changing their mind, or they're always frustrated or always threatening. And I always have two rules. These are my own personal rules. I don't know, everybody has to do their own. If a client ever swears at me, they're done. I just told them, now if they're not swearing at me, they just happen to use foul language, it's not that. But if they specifically get angry and swear at me, that's one. And two is if they ever threaten me, lawsuit or coming after me or anything else, that's the other one. I'm like, you know what? Those are two that you burn the bridge. If you swear at me or if you are threaten me in any way, I'm not going to keep working with you. But I even think that there are some that, it is hard though, to sift through on that customer service, which are the ones that are providing, that are just over the top, and which are the ones that you should fix your system. Sometimes it's on your end. You're not very organized. You don't provide very clear information. You don't do the work to gather the information on the front end. You don't set clear expectations. So sometimes, it's hard to distinguish between, is this something that I'm doing wrong that, I need to learn from, or I need to make this right, versus it's just those clients that are just always asking for more, or always unhappy, or always that are going to be forever, giving negative feedback. So how do you kind of delineate or sift through those clients as to which ones you should say no with, but also which ones that you should say, okay, this is a good opportunity to improve our service, or to learn from it, or to make it better?
Yeah, exactly. And I love that you brought up several points here. One is that you've got some guidelines that you personally use. I've got some guidelines that I personally use. And I'm going to give you a quick example, and then I'm going to go into answering your question more in depth here. But so I do a lot of personal, in-person trainings. And people will contract with me, and they'll fly me out, and then I'll do these events. And I had this one that they wanted to do this event with me. And I gave them just a killer discount. I was 50% of what I normally would have done, because I liked the event. I was okay with it. It was a referral that came from a friend of mine. And so, I gave them this discount, and they came back and they said, well, we're not going to use you because you're more expensive than any of the other presenters that we're using. And what I wanted to say to them is, I wanted to say, well, all of the presenters that you grabbed were actually just local people that, like, they're not professionals. They're just people who were willing to come and talk for 30 minutes. And, and so that's like me coming to you and saying, well, your legal fees are a lot more than my cousin who is willing to just talk to me. And it's like, well, yeah, but your cousin's not an attorney. So why would you expect it to be on par? You're paying for expertise. And I went to them and I said, look, here's the deal. I will do it at no cost if you'll do it virtual, and I will just do a virtual presentation. That way I don't incur travel. It's going to take an hour or two for me to just share some information. And they came back and they said, well, no, we've decided we want this to be a live thing. And I'm like, that's great, but I gave them something to go off of. But I had, my personal standards, because they came and countered my price. And I'm just like, it's not worth it to me. And so I knew up front what I was willing to do, and what, I had already put the discount in. I had no problem saying no to them. I gave them an alternative. It didn't work. And we just parted ways. We never ended up doing business together, and I was perfectly fine with that. And so, getting back to your question of, you said, what do you do? Well, you've got to, customer service happens on the front end. Like, when customer service is reactive, that's when the mistakes are made. When you're trying to figure out in a heated moment what you're going to do for a customer, or when you're willy-nilly, sometimes you're offering discounts, other times you're not offering discounts, that word spreads. People are like, oh yeah, they gave me a great discount. You're like, well, wait a second, they didn't give me a discount. If you're just on the fly trying to figure out what your customer service standards are, then you're going to fail at some point. And so it happens on the front end. And going back to this, example with the multinational, the company that the small business that I've been working with and consulting with, they have been frustrated from day one that the contract was not set up correctly. And I'm like, that's why we're having these problems, is because your initial contract, you were excited to, and it was actually a predecessor. I'm like, your predecessor was excited to see a $20,000 down payment from a multinational with an opportunity of, $500,000 a year sales in license fees. Like, you got pretty excited about this. And so you didn't take the time to read the fine print. You didn't think about what would happen if things didn't go the way that everyone wanted them to go. And so they got into some problems, and they're trying to work that out on the back end. Customer service happens on the front end. And that's what makes it successful. And so, kind of going back to you and your business, you made the comment, you said, I really haven't had to fire a lot of clients. Mm-hmm. And, in working with you and in seeing what you do and having given you a couple of referrals, I look at it and I say, you're actually very well organized. Like, if you get on your website and you see what your offering is, it's different. It's a unique offering when it comes to the way that you approach legal. but it's very clearly spelled out. And so I think the reason why you're not firing a lot of customers is because you up front, you already weeded out the people that aren't looking for your services. And that's a talent, that's a skill, and that's something that every business should be doing, is just.
No, and I agree with you. And I mean, that's kind of, you hit on there, and, it's a little bit of point of pride, but, I even this week, some of the things that we do, just kind of to pull the curtain back, just because I think I always love to look for ways to improve our customer service, is to give you an example. One thing that we did is I started having a question pop up on one of it was for trademarks, which is what we do. And, it was interesting. I had like 3 of those questions pop up in different formats, but very similar. Hey, what about this? And I'm like, oh, it's already really clear on all of our things, but it was popping up enough that we went back and said, how can we make it more clear so that when they hit this process, they already have the answer. They already know what it is up front, and we're not having to address it, or they're not getting frustrated, or we're not having to go back and forth and answer multiple questions. But I think it's that kind of that upfront and actually looking at the process and building it in that more than anything does that. And, kind of we take that approach with price transparency. To your point, if people know what things are going to cost, they'll either see the website and say, hey, that's out of our price range, or hey, that's a great deal, or hey, I can probably afford that. But it's one that, now they're not having to haggle over prices and say, hey, our prices are transparent, it's upfront, we think it's great pricing if it's for you. And I think that a lot of those, it's oftentimes, to your point, it's that reactive, oh, now we've got someone mad at us that's calling up and frustrated and angry. And sometimes that's, no matter what you do, you're going to have those clients.
Sure.
But if you're more proactive on the front end and you're working to say, okay, how can we improve? How can we tweak? How can we make it so that the onboarding is easy? How can we make it so getting the information for approval and all those steps, that it's now no longer, a black box and people don't know where things are at, but they get those updates along the way. I think that's a great approach. So you echo probably a lot of what are things that I agree with. Now, with that, so one of the things is, changing your offerings to meet our customer needs, which is kind of a bit shifting gears, but I think along the same lines, which is we also talked a little bit before the podcast, which is, sometimes with you're in customer service, but even just a business in general, you go in thinking, okay, I've got an idea for what we want to have the product to be. And so that's what you offer. And then you start getting customer feedback or customer pushback or customer service. And sometimes it's just, you're having to work on explaining the product better. You're having to help it market it better. You haven't find your right customers. And other times it's also, hey, you need to change your offering, or you're not meeting the customer need, or you're not conveying it well. But how do you kind of sift through the difference between, hey, I'm not conveying it or hitting the right customers, versus, no, I actually need to change our offering?
Really good question. There are some layers here that make it a little bit complicated, because you're asking a core question of, do I have the right target market, and am I trying to grow that target market, or am I trying to diversify that target market? And so, first off, the short answer is that you really need to put some data, some metrics behind it. One of the things, so, I also run a podcast, and, so for marketing, management, and money, when I'm looking at it, we do the 3 pillars: marketing, management, and money. Well, I was actually going over all of my episodes that I've released over the past, we've been going for about 2.5 years. And I was looking at the analytics of it, and I was trying to find trends to see, okay, do people care more about marketing? Do they care more about money? Do they care more about management? And so what of those 3 do people care more about? And the thing that I found was that there was no strong difference between the 3. It wasn't that one topic was of more interest. If I did a marketing episode versus a finance episode, I wouldn't necessarily get a stronger outpouring from one versus the other. But I did find a really interesting trend, and that is, when we hit on topics that were not so saturated, is where people care. And so I've actually kind of shifted my podcast to say, I still cover the essentials. I still make sure that people know how to build a marketing strategy, and they understand their balance sheet, and things like that. But we just did an episode recently on, third generation businesses. And we talked about the stages of, if I'm a first generation business, what that looks like, the pros and cons, and then a second generation, the pros and cons, and then a third generation, the pros and cons. And we basically said, third generation plus, because if you've survived third generation, then you kind of have a system in place. But it was a very popular episode, and it made me realize that when people are dealing with management, there's all sorts of books out there on how to effectively time manage, or crucial conversations, or whatever these common problems are. But I don't think people understand how to transition from, one business to the next, and that transition process starts years or even decades before you ever transition. And so, if you're looking at passing your business on to someone else, whether that be, a child or a relative, or whether that be you want to sell that business, at what point do you need to start looking at that, and when do you look at that? And so anyway, it was different from our traditional target market, where we look at just the traditional startups or growth businesses, and we kind of went to a more established clientele that we did this episode for, and it was very successful. And so looking at that and getting some data behind that was very important. And this is what I really want to hit on, is the fact that customer service, a lot of times people think that customer service is just emotional. It's like, oh, you got to make the customer happy. Oh, you got to have a good culture, and these kind of intangibles. But use data. This is what Google is doing all the time to determine their searching. And, the Google model, and this is very interesting. The Google model it's a customer service model, because they are measuring how much the customer likes the results that they provide in their searches. And so they got away from an accuracy model. I don't know if they ever really thought of an accuracy model, but if I type in, where to buy shoes, Google looks at it not, okay, I'm going to tell him where to buy shoes. Google looks at it and says, what is he really asking? He's probably wanting to know what styles and trends are popular right now. So it might give you different than what you specifically asked for, because Google has enough data behind it to know that that's what's really going on. And so I'm going to hit on the data. I'm going to say, if you're not making data-driven decisions, then you're not understanding customer service, and you're not understanding your target market. And I don't care whether you're a law firm or a podcaster, or whether you do e-commerce, it doesn't matter. Put some data behind those decisions, and just start looking for the trends and the patterns, and adjust off of that.
No, and I think that's definitely a great approach to take. I'll give the one caveat, which is make sure you have enough data to actually make a decision. If you only have two data points, and one is everybody, one customer loves your product and the other one hates it, you probably don't have enough data. So I think that definitely within that, I think there's a lot of, there's a good point of, we need to use data to direct things, but also make sure you're getting the right data, you're asking the right questions, because sometimes your data you think you're making decisions off of is bad, or it's not big enough. So make sure, one, you have the right data set, but then two, look to say, okay, now what are we seeing and how can we adjust things? So
one of the things that we use in our own business to kind of help protect against that is, we'll never make a decision off of data. We'll always make a follow-up off of data. And so if I have some data points, instead of making a decision, instead of saying, okay, I'm going to do a new product offering, then what I will do is I will say, oh, I have a theory here that I should be offering a new product. And then I'm going to create a test environment to get additional data to support whether that is correct. And so we always put a buffer there between our data and our decisions to make sure that we're not getting in over our head. Because honestly, I love looking at the data, but I'm not an analyst. That's not what I do. And so by putting a little bit of space, a little bit of buffer to say, okay, the data seems to be pointing in a direction. I'm going to test that theory out. If it still holds water, I might test it again, and then, launch this product. Not be like, oh my goodness, I've seen companies that they've gotten, customer feedback from one customer, and they've done a whole product launch and just failed because, yeah, that customer wanted it, but, 10,000 others didn't.
Now, I'll give the flip side to that, which is I think sometimes you also need to look and see, can we are we going to spend more time analyzing the data, trying it out, figuring it out and actually looking at it than it would cost to just test it out? In other words, there is a difference between, hey, is this an easy thing that we can,
Sure.
implement, roll out, try it out? It's going to take us 5 hours to try it out or 20 hours to review the data. And it's not going to be, not going to have a drawback. It's not going to be harmful to the business. In other words, it's not going to worsen the customer experience, or it may not be, that can be a product, it can be a service, it can be changing your system. But if it's something that's easy to test out, I'm a big believer, sometimes just try it out. And a lot of times, you can try it out or test it out and actually see whether or not it works quicker sometimes, and you can have to try and culminate, aggregate, get all that data, and then you can get that feedback as well. So I think there is that balance there. Well, we have now blown through a half an hour, and we've only scratched the surface, but it was definitely a fun conversation. And we'll definitely have to, or we have the series of podcasts. So I'm looking forward to hopefully having you on again soon in the future.
Sure.
But for this episode, for the expert episode, as we wrap up, I always have one question I always ask at the end of each episode. But before we dive to that, this is a teaser for everybody that's listening. We are doing the bonus question. We're going to talk a little bit about the one crazy entrepreneurial idea. And so definitely stay tuned after the episode wraps up if you want to hear a little bit more about that. Now, before we dive into the bonus question, as we wrap up the normal portion of the episode, final question I always ask is, now within your industry, what is one of the myths that people commonly hold, and why is it wrong?
So my industry, and let me just get clear on what I do, is I provide information, I provide training, and so I definitely sell a service. I do not sell any products. And so, when I get into, small business trainings, I look at it, and the big myth that I always get frustrated with, and there are actually several, but I'm going to hit on this one, is that, people think that when you go to a training, it's a one and done. Oh yeah, I've done that training before. And I'm like, I don't care whether it's my training or anyone's training. You actually have to be immersed in it, and you have to keep doing it. Trainings that I find that are very valuable, I'll do them multiple times. Books that I read that are very valuable, I will read them multiple times. The first time that you go through it, you're only going to absorb 10, 20, 30% of that at a retention level. You might be processing it as it's happening, even like this interview right now that we're discussing things. If you're just listening to this while you're commuting into the office, then you're probably going to retain 10% if you're average, 20% if you're really astute. There's still 80% of things that were said or covered that you're not going to retain after a 24-hour period. And so, I get very frustrated when people, and obviously this is what I sell, but even when it's someone else's and they're like, oh yeah, I've been to that training before. And I'm like, look at the greats. How many basketball players are still throwing layups? I guarantee they know how to do a layup. It's not the question of knowing how, it's muscle memory. And so, to me, entrepreneurship is muscle memory. Like you want to get to the point that you're not thinking about it. And we could even bring this back to the customer service. If you're really good at customer service, it's muscle memory. Like you don't have to think about whether this is the right customer or the wrong customer. You don't have to think about the response that you're going to give. You just intuitively know how to handle this customer. And when you see someone who's at that level do that, you really get impressed. You think to yourself, wow, that was smooth. Like, yeah, that's because they've practiced it hundreds, if not thousands of times. And so for me, entrepreneurship is muscle memory. Read the book again, go to the training again, watch the YouTube video again, listen to the podcast again. Don't just think that, it's not a race. We're not trying to consume as much as we can. We're trying to internalize what we can when we're improving our businesses. So a little bit of a myth, a little bit of a pitch, but that's what I see happen a lot.
All right. Well, definitely a good myth to overcome and a great one to learn from. So, well, with that, if people want to reach out to you, they want to be a customer, they want to be a client, they want to be an employee, they want to be an investor, they want to be your next best friend, any or all of the above, what's the best way to reach out to you, contact you, find out more?
So you can hit me up directly, Ryan at marketingmanagementmoney.com. You can check us out, marketingmanagementmoney.com, and you can listen to the podcast that is found on all major platforms. Super easy to get out there, and so that's a great way to see if our approach to business is in line with the way that that you want to run your business.
All right. Well, I definitely encourage people to reach out, connect up, and find out more. And with that, if you ever need help on the intellectual property side, patents, trademarks, copyrights, or anything else, feel free to reach out to us at Miller IP Law. Just go to strategymeeting.com, grab some time with us to chat, and we're always here to help. So, well, with that, now as we've wrapped up the normal portion of the episode, it's always fun to shift gears just a bit. And, it's always kind of, if you're anything like me, I always have that kind of one idea. I have more than one idea, but one idea that I always kind of keep in my back pocket is kind of my someday pile, or my crazy idea that, hey, I'd really love to do this someday. I probably will never get to it, but I still would love to do it. And so it's always kind of that one crazy idea that I'd like to approach. And sometimes it's a terrible idea, and other times it's when I don't have the time or resources or bandwidth and other things. But with that, I'll turn it over to you to share a little bit with the audience. What is that one crazy idea for you?
So as you pointed out, one is not the number. I've got multiple. And so I went with the hot button right now. I have a good friend of mine that she bought a commercial building, and she's using the bottom to run her business. But the upstairs was just a series of office suites. Now, this building was built, might have been the 1800s or early 1900s. So it's about 120 years old at this point. And so there's a lot of, historic charm on the upstairs. But you got, it's over 4,000 square feet. And she's always been wanting to put some sort of fun center in there. And when I picture fun center, I picture like arcades and roller skates and stuff like that. And I'm just like, not interested, and she's hit me up a couple times, like if I wanted to even just help her plan this. And I have flat out told her, I don't think this is a good idea. I am not interested. I will help you, but this is not the idea you want to run with. Well, a little while back, a few months ago, it dawned on me that escape rooms are just blowing up. They're extraordinarily popular. And one of my hobbies is I'm actually a board game designer, and I just do it for hobby. I've submitted to publishers before, never quite got published. I was pretty close a couple of times. I've self-published a few games, and so I enjoy just designing board games. And I like the kind of the puzzle side of it. Well, I start thinking about these escape rooms, and I'm like, oh my gosh, these are just like live action board games. You're the pieces that are moving through this. And so my creative side really just kind of, exploded quite a bit. And my oldest son, he has been taking a lot of CAD classes and engineering design classes. He's a junior in high school right now. And he actually has an internship with a company that does a lot of 3D print and design. And so, I reached out to him and I'm like, do you think you could make, like 3D print a bunch of props for, an escape room? And he's like, oh, that would be awesome. And so we were totally excited. We were going to make this thing happen. And the thing that really set it all off is, so we did an initial, I hit up this owner and I said, hey, would you like to do this on the upstairs floor instead of, your arcade and whatever? And she's like, oh, I love it. And so we were going to move forward on this, put something together. We got the city, they came and inspected and needed a fire suppressant sprinkling system installed. I was blown away at how expensive that was. So it was $50,000 to $60,000 to put in a sprinkling system, and I knew it was going to be expensive. I was actually estimating at $10,000 to $20,000. To see it be triple what I was estimating, I was a little bit shocked. And then the cost to get the elevator ADA, because it was on the second floor. And so anyway, she backed out because it was over $100,000 of investment that she would have had to put into her building to make it happen. And I don't blame her.
Someday, even if it didn't work out today and it's too expensive, you're going to build the world's best and the most amazing escape room, and then I'll be your first customer.
I've got them, like we mapped them out. And so, they've been designed on paper. They just need a home. So if anyone's listening and has a great home, I've got some awesome designs that I want to get out there.
All right. Well, I love the crazy idea. I think that'd be a fun one to pursue, and definitely look forward to hearing one day when you actually build out your first escape room. So, but with that, thank you again, Ryan, for coming on the podcast. It's been fun. It's been a pleasure, and wish the next leg of your journey even better than the last.
Hey, appreciate it. You take care.